You are 2 hours into a film you dislike. Nothing about it is working, but you stay, not because it might improve, but because you have already given it 2 hours. That feeling has a name, and it is costing people far more than an evening. Careers, relationships, years of a life. The strange part is that the people most likely to fall into this trap are often the ones who care most deeply about making good decisions. This is not a failure of logic. It feels like loyalty. It feels like commitment, like perseverance, like refusing to be someone who quits. The same instinct that makes you finish what you start is the one that keeps you in the wrong job for another 18 months, or in a relationship that stopped working 2 years ago. What makes this pattern so quietly devastating is that it does not announce itself. It disguises itself as virtue. You tell yourself you are being patient, being resilient, honoring the investment you made. But underneath that story, you are doing something simpler and stranger. You are letting the past make decisions for your future. We tend to think of bad decisions as moments of weakness or laziness. But the sunk cost fallacy is different. It is driven by the very qualities we admire in people: dedication, follow-through, a reluctance to give up. That is what makes it so hard to see in yourself and so easy to see in everyone else. By the end of this, you will understand why the brain operates this way, what the research reveals about who it affects most, and how to find the small gap between the feeling and the choice that follows it. In 1985, psychologists Arkes and Kahneman Blumer ran a study that became one of the most cited findings in behavioral economics. They gave participants a scenario. You have bought tickets to 2 ski trips, one expensive, one cheaper. As the weekend approaches, you realize you would genuinely enjoy the cheaper trip more. Which do you choose? Most people chose the more expensive trip, not because it would make them happier, because they had paid more for it. The anticipated enjoyment became less important than the money they could no longer recover. What surprises me most about that finding is how mechanical it is. People were not choosing what they wanted. They were choosing what felt like the least wasteful option, even when they understood, consciously, that the money was already gone. Arkes and Blumer named this the sunk cost effect. A sunk cost is any investment of time, money, or effort that cannot be retrieved. The rational position is clear. These costs are irrelevant to future decisions. You cannot recover them whether you quit or continue. But the brain does not process loss that cleanly. This is where Daniel Kahneman's work becomes essential. In Thinking Fast and Slow, published in 2011, Kahneman describes loss aversion, the tendency to feel the pain of a loss roughly twice as intensely as the pleasure of an equivalent gain. Sunk costs activate that aversion directly. Abandoning a path feels like confirming a loss. Continuing keeps the possibility of redemption alive, even when that possibility no longer exists. The brain is not broken. It is doing what it was shaped to do. It just happens to be doing it in a world where the circumstances have already changed. Picture someone who has spent 3 years studying for a degree they no longer want. People around them say, "Just leave, start over, it is not too late." But from inside that situation, leaving does not feel free. It feels like erasing 3 years. Worse, it feels like becoming someone who wasted 3 years. That is the identity layer of this trap, and it is the part that purely economic models tend to miss. It is not just that you have spent resources. It is that continuing to spend them is how you avoid confronting what those resources have bought. James Hollis, writing in Finding Meaning in the Second Half of Life, describes how we build lives around avoiding certain uncomfortable truths. We construct commitments and identities that insulate us from the question of whether we are actually living what we value. The sunk cost trap can function exactly this way. Staying in a failing situation is not always weakness. It can be a sophisticated act of self-protection. The Arkes and Blumer research supports this. They found that the sunk cost effect was stronger when participants felt personally responsible for the original investment. the more you freely chose something, the harder it becomes to unchoose it. Because reversing the choice means accepting that you chose wrongly, and that is a different kind of loss entirely. It is not just money or time. It is the version of yourself who made a sound decision, who saw clearly, who knew what they were doing. Letting go of a sunk cost sometimes means letting go of that self-image too. That is why the feeling runs so much deeper than any argument about rationality can reach. The exit from this pattern is not about logic. Telling yourself that sunk costs are irrational does not dissolve the feeling. The feeling runs deeper than the argument. What actually helps is changing the question you are asking. Instead of asking whether continuing honors what you have already given, you ask something different. If I arrived at this situation today for the first time, with nothing already invested, would I choose to begin? That single shift moves the decision from the past into the present. It does not erase the grief of what has been spent, but it separates that grief from the question of what to do next. Those are two different questions, and conflating them is precisely what the fallacy relies on. Kahneman's research and the broader field of behavioral economics it helped shape is honest about something important. Awareness of a bias does not automatically correct it. The feeling will still be there. But naming it in the right moment can create a small gap between the feeling and the action. In that gap, a different choice becomes possible. Viktor Frankl, reflecting on human agency in man's search for meaning, wrote about the capacity to choose one's response, even within circumstances we did not select for ourselves. The sunk cost fallacy is one of those circumstances. We did not choose to have a brain that fears loss and values consistency above almost everything else. But we can learn to notice when that brain is quietly making the decision for us, and to ask whether we would endorse the choice if we were making it fresh. That is not a cure. It is a practice, and like most practices worth keeping, it becomes easier the more honestly you apply it. If this kind of careful thinking about how the mind misleads itself is useful to you, consider subscribing. Every video here is built around the same aim, to help you build a more accurate map of your own mind.